That would be interesting to take yours on it and you do mine. Good. Thanks a lot. So, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. What I would like to talk with you about climate targets for the construction sector. So, I would like to introduce a little bit the challenges that we are facing and also... Okay, good. So, I will do it like this. So what I would like to do is to talk you through the climate targets, the challenges that we are facing, and show you some of the proposals actually that is going all around the world. And what I would also like to do in the final part of my presentation, I would like to talk a little bit about the opportunities and the challenges of artificial intelligence in the construction sector. But let's start with some facts. What we have seen in the last 100 years is a population development roughly of a factor of 4, so that the population grew to this extent. At the same time, what we have seen is that natural resources increased by the factor of 8, and greenhouse gas emissions by a factor of 15. So what you could see is that we have a deconnected growth of resource consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. And another factor or another fact that I thought is very interesting to see how much concrete is used or has been used in China between 2011 and 2013. And this accumulates to the same amount that the US has used in the 20th century. So within 100 years, this is the amount of concrete that has been used in China. And another figure that tells us that the infrastructure that will be available in 2050, half of it still needs to be built. This is good news for the construction industry, but this is also showing to the same extent the challenges that we are facing. Looking a little bit around, what has happened in the last years, not about Finland, but this is an example of Dubai. This is the Dubai World Trade Center in 1979, and the energy consumption that was up to 278 kilowatt hours per square meter in a year. And since then, a lot of things has happened, a lot of regulations has been enforced, and energy efficiency took place. But what we also see is this. The Emirates Tower in 2000 is consuming 560 kilowatt hours per square meter in a year. So obviously, although we have introduced a lot of energy efficiency measures and rules all around the world, we still have an increase in energy consumption, which is also visible on a global scale. So what we do see is that we have still a global increase of primary energy consumption. Here you see it by different regions, the OECD, Europe, Americas, Africa, Middle East, and Asia. And obviously, the steepest increase is to be observed in Asia. This is not news, but this is just to support a little bit what we are heading to. So we are far away actually from a decoupling or a minimization, reduction of the energy consumption on a global scale. It's actually the opposite that we still have to face. One of the main reasons for the energy increase is obviously a lot of consumer goods that have been introduced, is contributing to gross domestic product, helping us to create economic growth, but at the same time, they come along with a lot of resource consumption and energy consumption as well. And these are all these fancy devices that are very much widespread and that we have to deal with also. I come back to it when talking about smart cities, smart environments. And I know that Finland is one of the most advanced in the world, actually, if not leading. So this is certainly a point that we have to take into consideration when developing this further. So in a nutshell, what does it mean? The construction industry is a very important industry, of course, but at the same time, it comes along with a lot of energy consumption, resource consumption, usage, occupation of land or land harvesting. It consumes roughly 17% of fresh water, but at the same time it contributes to 10% of the gross domestic product. So the construction industry is key for us in terms of economy and is creating 7% of all global jobs. So what we need to do is we have to reconsider and think how to change actually the construction industry, keeping the good and reducing the bad. If we consume and continue to consume and produce like we do today, we would have to need 4 planet Earth. And this is obviously not a reality that we can deal with. So we have a huge challenge actually to minimize resource consumption, and certainly Annette will come back to it a little bit later in her talk as well. So the overall challenge is that we would like, obviously, on a global scale, increase human well-being, increase in many parts of the world economic activity, economic growth, because there are many parts of the world still suffering from an underdeveloped economic situation, but at the same time we are facing the challenge of resource decoupling and especially impact decoupling. So what we need to work towards is really the decoupling of economic growth, resource consumption, and the environmental impacts. One of the main initiatives and drivers is obviously the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that have been introduced, the 17s. You are very much familiar with those. That needs to be achieved by 2030. Very interesting goals, but what is lacking, and I think this is part also of your discussion today, is the operationalization of these goals. So how to make happen that these goals can really be achieved, and what does it mean for our sector, for the construction sector? I've talked about the energy consumption in the introduction, but very often what is really not taking into consideration, and I called it here a blind spot, is embodied carbon. So all the carbon that is already built in the existing environment, or that is really used to produce new construction materials, the buildings and the infrastructures of the future. So obviously, and you see the figure that more than 11% of the global CO2 emissions by the construction sector is really dedicated to building materials and construction. So beside the optimization of the operational energy and the shift towards renewable energies, this is one of the key challenges that we have to work with. I had the opportunity to visit Egypt in April last year, and this is a figure that, or a slide that has been presented by the Egyptian Minister for Housing. And when we are talking about how to develop our environments, our cities, this was a very different figure. So he is facing the challenge to build in the upcoming 10 years 42 new cities. Completely new cities in Egypt. And they are working towards this goal. And if you have ever been to Egypt and know what kind of resources there are available, this is only a few. It's a lot of sand and very little beside sand. So what does this mean? We have a lot of challenges, and this housing minister or building minister has a lot of challenges to build completely new cities. And on a global scale, what does it mean for us? We have to consider actually on a global scale which construction materials, which construction practices really fits regional availabilities and demands. So to allow the population and the Egypts to build in the future, they have to use concrete. There is no way and other kind of construction materials to build so fast a lot of buildings that they need to have. But this means on a global scale, considering that the concrete industry is contributing with 8% on the anthropogenic global CO2 emissions, that we have in certain other parts of the world to reduce the use of concrete to really have a chance to achieve our carbon goals on a global scale. So what we have to work towards is a more regionalized approach for a sustainable built environment. And this is the current practice. I will not go into the details. So a lot of abiotic resources are used there, and to a certain extent they are needed. What's happening all around the world a little bit? So if I was now into that, we have to look into the opportunities. What are the resources that we have available in our environments? And what are the resources that needs to be saved? One of the examples is certainly that we have to take care about the urban fabric. So what is already built in our cities? And one of the low-hanging fruits is to work with using recycled concrete aggregates in new constructions as well. So when we are tearing down our buildings, if we need to, because I've been introduced that you have taken a smart decision to move into an existing building here, this ministry, instead of building new. And I think this is actually the approach that is very much important, which is very important. But at the same time, if we need to build new, there is certainly a chance to use recycled concrete aggregates as well. The Swiss introduced a regulation, and this is for the city of Zurich, for instance. All public buildings need to have at least 25% recycled concrete aggregates for all their new construction. I thought this is a very interesting policy that they have introduced. It's not solving all the problems. We have a lot of burden shifting to be taken into consideration as well, that's sure, but it helps us also to save natural resources. Talking about urban mining, so all the resources that are already built in our environment, what we have to work also in academia with much more is to get an understanding where the materials are currently allocated, providing maps about the geographical distribution of types of materials. Where do we have concrete? Where do we have steel available? When will it come out of the existing infrastructures or building stocks to be available for new constructions? And this is certainly a thing that we have to work more towards. Interesting example from Munich, actually. Okay, so I will keep it short. Annette will go into the details. It's a very interesting approach about renewable resources per square meter of living area instead of kilowatt hours per living area. But I keep it for Annette afterwards. Another example is a Swedish example that has been introduced by the city of Gothenburg, my hometown. It's called Hoppet, and this is a fossil-free preschool that needs to be built. This is the first experiment in this kind of that they're doing in LCA for all the construction materials that are going to be used, and the school should be built as soon as possible. We are filling the 400 years anniversary, the city of Gothenburg, in 2021, and this should be built and serve as a role model afterwards for all kind of preschools and schools afterwards from the local authorities. There are challenges ahead. I think we will not be able to build a fossil-free preschool, but the lessons learned will be tremendous actually, and hopefully also be used afterwards. So especially cables are one of the major challenges for us, and obviously fire safety. An interesting example, because I talked now more on the incentive side, public authorities, legislation, I will go into the another example where the industry is setting targets of the future, which I thought is very interesting. It has been introduced in Japan. It's a so-called top runners approach, where the leader in the industry is setting the bar for future regulation in 5 years. So imagine a heat pump, you have a coefficient of performance today that is the highest in the sector or highest in the industry, and this will be the minimum requirement in 5 years or 10 years or whatever. And I think this is a very smart approach where the industry itself, together with the public authorities, is setting the bars for the future. So what we have seen a lot of examples. There are many policies in place, and we have even more policies to come up. But on the other side, what we do see is until 2030, with the current practices, I cannot point on the screen, but with the current national policies and individual actor commitments and other initiatives, we are still far away from really reaching the carbon goals that we have set. So with all the initiatives currently in place, we are not really achieving our goals by 2030 regarding the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And you have also very ambitious carbon and energy goals, also in Finland and all around the world, in Helsinki. And this is certainly a challenge that we have to face. Another graph, you see it here, current policies, new policies, but to really get down to the 1.5 degrees agreement, and this is a chart by the International Energy Agency, we have to introduce much more new initiatives. It needs all our stakeholders that we have, from academia, industry, public authorities, finance sector, to really make this necessary change happen. In the current practice, it doesn't work. So what we have seen in the past is that we have worked a lot in the so-called comfort zone. We were all looking for win-win situations where we can save money, where we can save the environment or make money, whatever. This has been done in the last decades with a lot of success. So we brought down the carbon emissions, energy consumption dramatically. But what needs to happen is even more ambitious. We need really to leave our comfort zone and take these challenges. What we are talking about actually is this kind of step. It's like landing on the moon in the 60s. This is the same challenge that we are facing in the future, actually. The same amount, we need to be visionary. We need to really set or invest a lot of resources in terms of smart ideas, stakeholders, to make really this carbon challenge happen. Otherwise, there is no chance really to reach this goal. The European Commission has introduced and changed from the challenge-driven approach to a mission-oriented approach, which is very much needed. That means that we really have to work on very ambitious missions to make these UN SDGs really happen. One of the proposals is to build 100 carbon-neutral cities by 2030. And this is very ambitious, actually, considering what you have seen before. But this is actually the range or the amount of actions that are really needed to make a change happen. And we all have to contribute to it. And one of the supporting initiatives is the European Green Deal. We need to see how far this really will help us to achieve the goals, but at least it's going in the right direction. And I'm really happy that the Commission is now really putting this as a priority. What are the challenges that we are facing? So one of the major challenges is investment practices and return expectations. So what we do see in the construction industry, in the housing, real estate business, is very often a conflicting investment behavior that is in conflict with the sustainability goals, that is very looking forward long-term, and investment opportunities need to provide a return on investment in 5 years if you are really a hedge fund, or a classical investor is looking for a return on investment on 10 years. Housing associations sometimes have an expectation that is in the range of 20 years, 30 years, but a responsible investor with a life cycle cost consideration needs to take longer investment periods and payback periods into consideration. We have a huge conflict with the economic system, investment behavior, and sustainability goals today, actually. And this is really a challenge that we have to work with. Now I'm shifting completely the field because this is really a game changer that we have to consider also in the built environment. It's artificial intelligence that is going faster and faster. So what we have seen, you have heard about the Moore's law, that every 2 years the capacities of artificial systems or computers is doubling. And this has changed dramatically also in the last 5 to 10 years. Nowadays we have a doubling of computer capacity every 3 to 4 months, not 2 years. And this will accelerate. So what you do see is an exponential development of computer power that can help us, but looking into the reports from very interesting colleagues from MIT or Berkeley in the field of artificial intelligence, Russell, for instance, he is claiming always it's good to have very strong machines that can do faster and better calculations, but they can also do faster wrong calculations. And this is really to be taken into consideration, that these artificial or computer power does not mean that we are doing it faster good. We can also doing it faster bad. And this needs to be taken into consideration when talking about the future development of the construction industry. Nevertheless, taking this claim from Andrew, artificial intelligence is the new electricity. Just as electricity transformed industry after industry 100 years ago, artificial intelligence will do the same. And I completely agree. I think we cannot imagine the change that will happen in the upcoming decade. Then looking into how much are we in the construction industry prepared for this challenge. This is a chart, a little bit outdated now, from McKinsey, a study, Global Institute Industry Digitalization Index. And what you can see is the second least developed sector is the construction industry regarding digitalization, after agriculture and hunting. This is the only sector that is less developed and prepared than the construction sector. And I think we have really to do this. And also in academia, I doubt that we are really educating the future decision makers in academia properly today. So we are also not doing our bit. Yeah. But Industry 4.0 is a reality, it's coming, and the digitalization of all processes involved in construction across all construction phases will help us to optimize the construction processes, but we will have to face huge changes on the, within the society. And one of the major challenges for us in the construction industry is obviously that we have very individualized processes. It's rather complex compared to the car industry. It's a completely different challenge that we are facing. But nevertheless, we have to work in this direction and have to understand the opportunities, but as well the challenges as well, to build smart cities that are composed of many, many elements that will develop in the future even faster. And I think in the future we have to face this. These machines, they will certainly not look like this. This is our imagination. Everything needs to look like humans. But nevertheless, machines will come in and they will replace, of course, labor to an extent. And we don't know what this does really mean for the entire society, but this is a reality that will come much faster. So our idea is normally, or attitude is looking back and say, yeah, it took 10 years to develop and the mobile phones. The future will be different. We have an exponential development of artificial intelligence, and we cannot imagine how this will change. And this is mainly driven by these guys. They have the resources, they have the power, the labor, and there is nothing that is hindering them to also enter much stronger the construction industry. So the competitors of tomorrow might not be the Skanskas, NCCs, Vedekes, and Peabs, It might be really the Facebook, Googles. They are building, creating, or they're constructing cars today, and they will also construct neighborhoods in the future because they're eager to get hold of data. Smart neighborhoods. Why should anybody hinder them if they have the resources and the will to do? So this is really a thing that needs to happen. What we have to do, we have to watch about artificial intelligence, and we have to work much more towards global governance. Who is owning data? How is data used, actually? For which purpose? What are regulations to be put in place to develop smart cities? For me, it's not that much about technologies. For me, it's a lot about ethics as well. So what are rules and ethical requirements that we need to establish in the future? This is really a thing that we have to talk about. And to close my presentation, this is actually, I would like to invite you, if you are interested in this kind of discussions on digitalization of the construction industry, the carbon sector, resource consumption and limitations, you are much welcome to attend the World Sustainable Built Environment Conference that will take place on the 9th and 11th in Gothenburg. It's a Swedish, if the virus allows, obviously. So we don't know if this will happen, but so far we have planned to hold the conference with roughly 2,000 participants from industry, public authorities, and I heard Pekka will, among us, Matti and many other people here from Finland. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Professor Wallbaum. Does it work? Yes, it works. Thank you. That was really educational and also interesting. And I think we have a few minutes for audience questions. And I would like to ask you. Someone has asked this, but I chose this question because it's really interesting. If China uses so much concrete, should we focus on low-carbon collaboration with Chinese partners instead of lowering our carbon footprint in EU?
Yeah, the typical question actually. Should we do our homework or should we not focus on the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India and China? I think we have to do it both, otherwise it will not work. They are watching us, they are looking what we are doing, and I think also in business opportunities there are really chances. So if we're not doing our homework here, we are not really, it's hard to be trusted elsewhere. So this is a little bit my answer to it, actually.
Yes, thank you. Next one would be if artificial intelligence takes over in construction, do we need architects or engineers anymore? And also for construction workers, like your picture was.
This is to be seen, actually. So in the upcoming decades, obviously we will see this, but I assume that we will see much more prefabrication in the future. There is certainly a lot of business potential there, but also what we have seen in most of the studies, it's much easier to keep timelines. We can predict much better costs for construction processes, etc., etc. So for real estate housing, it's much easier. Infrastructure projects, it's more challenging, obviously. Yes, we will see more importance of the engineers, data engineers. But I think what is important, we should never forget that livable and sustainable cities, we have to like our cities. So do not underestimate the power of design and the creativity of architects. So I think we need them both. It will be seen to which extent, actually, if we still need to educate so many architects than we do today. This needs to be seen, actually.
Yes, thank you. And we also have a little gift for you to thank you for joining us. Thank you.